Welcome to Josh's Worst Nightmare Oddcast, presented by Denver Horror Collective. I'm your host, author Josh Schlossberg, surveying the dark landscape of biological horror fiction. For this episode, we are being visited by Rosemary Thorne. Rosemary Thorne is a bilingual Spanish writer, researcher, and translator living in Madrid, Spain. Her first novel, El Pacto de las DOCE UVAS, was published in December 2021. She has also translated Edward Lee's The Big Head into Spanish for Dimensiones Ocultas Press. Her goal for the years to come is to populate the English market with her dreadful monsters. Welcome to my nightmare, Rosemary.
Thank you for having me, Josh. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing really well. I'm so glad that you could make it all the way from Spain. So thank you so much. So folks know on Josh's Worst Nightmare, I invite on horror authors to talk about an aspect of biological horror, which I define as living creatures and vital processes relevant to their writing. This episode, we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion about witches, warlocks, sorcerers, altered states, and how that might tie into biological horror. So, Rosemary, why is this a topic that interests you?
Well, I think actually with the recent pandemic, we have a wonderful opportunity to see how it can affect, not only the body, but also the mind. And from that, how it's not just the physical manifestation, but also the mental, how to say it, obsession of it. It can be like a something that it is create. Not only that the virus is going to act, but also the psychology of the masses are going to act too, and that's going to have a negative side too. So we have seen it recently. But I think that actually is like like in voodoo, that's something that I've studied a little, is that when sickness comes, it's because there is an imbalance between the physical world and the spiritual world. And I like it very much. I began studying it with different authors, but then I am quite sure that you know this movie, The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
It was directed by Wes Craven. It was a book. The book is different than the movie, but it is actually quite similar. So there is this character, Dargent Paytravel, I think, and he was the bad guy in Haiti, and he was creating zombies, and there was like a chemistry to it. And then that's the, I mean, not in the movie, not so much, but in the book, you can actually, it is explained that when you don't respect the forces or the gods, then there is going to be unbalance. There is going to be a hole, and that's where sickness is going to come. What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, that's all really great stuff. And yeah, whereas I do call my stuff biological horror, my stuff almost always ranges into, well, the supernatural and also tends to have that spiritual connection as well. So whether it's symbolic or otherwise, that what is going on in the physical world, what is going on with the body is mirrored in what's going on in the universe or with spirits or higher powers or whatever you want to call it. So that's really interesting. So voodoo really does touch on that. So sickness is that sickness maybe in society or it's in your psyche or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that could tie into pandemic and stuff like that. I mean, how does virus spread around? You know, how do viruses come into society? It's through people's behavior, which may or may not, you know, there could be all sorts of commentary on that. But yeah, the voodoo stuff, I don't know a ton about voodoo. That's, it's always, it seems like it's always put in a different category than just, okay, well, here is witchcraft, but obviously it's the exact same thing. It's just a particular element of witchcraft. And so basically what, like my understanding of voodoo is originally African components brought into the Caribbean, and then a lot of that in maybe the southern US. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes, and the Caribbean. And
Like,
also there is going to be, so it's going to be Haiti, Cuba, and then other countries like Venezuela. It's a strong there. But in those countries it's going to be Santeria, so it's different.
right.
Um, there are going to be elements in common, of course, but and then huge differences. But I think that the purest, I mean, the closest to Benin, which is like one of the original sources, is going to be New Orleans and then Haiti, and that's where the main slaves went. Sorry. So another thing that I was interested in, I mean, you're gonna have that not respecting what the gods, not serving them well. Uh, okay, so first, voodoo is a religion, and then there are practices. Those practices are magic, because like from my point of view, and that will be like, from my point of view, it will be very long to explain. Everything is magic, every practice. So anyway, Buddhism is actually one of the most complex religions that I have ever read and studied. It's amazing. But anyway, like, so it's going to be like the sickness is going to be the sickness of the body. Yeah. The, an imbalance in the spiritual world causes an imbalance in the body. That's going to be one dimension. Another thing that I was interested in talking about is being poisoned on purpose in order to have an initiation, which also happens. Not a specific, I mean, in Buddhism, it is going to be much more under control, of course, and it's not going to be so. I mean, the chemistry is not okay. It's going to be as there are going to be substances with which you are going to move your awareness, your self-awareness. So possession can take over, okay? And then yes, in other religions like shamanism, I'm thinking about Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan and Don Janao, those books. That's actually going to be having an altered experience, and you will have to endure like a sort of a hero's journey, and death is going to be like crossing the abyss and everything. So it has those two dimensions. And obviously, one of the things I find very interesting is that horror is a step. I mean, you have to overcome horror,
Mhm.
and then you come out of the experience wiser.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just amazing because horror is not an end in itself. It's actually a step of, it can be an initiation step. What do you think?
Yeah, I like all of that. And so that does tie into a bit of psychedelics. I mean, you talked a little bit about poisoning for initiation, obviously, some of that. I assume what you're referring to. So, well, what are you referring to when you say poisoning for initiation?
All right. So it's so there. Well, in the case, for instance, in the case of Haiti and all the zombie creation, isn't it's as you that's is not poison, but it is actually like contaminating or polluting the body with something that it is foreign, and it's going to create a near death state. And how to say, your own awareness of it can actually save you. It could be related to self hypnotism. All right, so it's something that you are aware that you are enduring that, and you have to lead your consciousness, your awareness out of that process of your body completely messed up by whatever you have taken, which is, so that's going to be in Haiti. That's going to be some. They are going to, each religion and each practice. Sorry, each religion. Yeah, because I think, yeah. I mean, yeah, perhaps it's more. Yeah, I was thinking about being Buddhist. Sorry. um, Practices, let's going to call them spiritual practices. Um, each of them are going to have their own substance. And that's something that, for instance, and it's going to alter the state. Aldous Huxley also treated it in
Yes.
the DOCE perception. So I mean, you Americans know a lot about it because you had it. Like you had Timothy Leary in the 70s, and I think that in that particular, as you can, if you see it, um, many people who experienced with these substances, some of them unfortunately didn't make it because it is a process. If you see it in some African tribes, or when you read the Golden Boat by Fraser, you're gonna see that these are in ancient times. These were part of rituals, very important rituals, and you had to make it or not. If you didn't make it, then you weren't ready. You weren't mature enough. So imagine if you translate that message to what happens in the 70s in the United States, where many young people experience with it, and then they didn't make it. Some did. Actually, one of the things that I have learned is that Hoffman, Albert Hoffman, he died quite old.
Mhm.
So as like there might be a relationship between knowing how to manage your altered state caused by a sort of, let's call it, pollution of the body, and then to have a long life, to be okay. But again, well, I don't know if you have had any experience with psychedelics. um I scarcely, and I am terrified. I think that I wouldn't. I can read about it. I can watch movies about it. I can listen to some music, which is amazing that they can actually alter your states too. But I don't think that I can do the thing. I will be terrified. I'll need more initiation, more time. I don't know.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good summation of the whole history of that. I mean, so psychedelics, altered states, a kind of a contaminant in the body needing to overcome a horror. So yeah, when I was younger had experimented with mushrooms on many occasions. And yeah, I mean with certain mushrooms or even arguably the psilocybin, there's a fine line between you're poisoning your body and you are utilizing basically chemicals that are there's already pathways in your body for those specific chemicals. So it's that fine line of the foreign and also, well, it wouldn't be doing stuff inside our body if it sort of wasn't meant to, in a sense. Like, so I I think, yeah, the 60s were, I was always really fascinated with that. I read and listened to and everything about the basically the proliferation of LSD, which I've not done that, but through the military basically, and then they did tests on people, and then it kind of went through people like Ken Kesey and other folks like that, Timothy Leary, and that became very much part of the culture. It's funny, the very repressed military world accidentally, or who knows, unleashed a thing that really helped catalyze. I think it was already burgeoning, but anti-war movement, kind of like a a greening of America in many ways. And then it did lead to a lot of literature. Carlos Castaneda, I read a lot of his stuff. So for folks who aren't familiar, Castaneda wrote supposed to be true stories. Most people don't think that they're true, but who knows? Maybe they're true, or certainly based on some ethnography. And it's a guy who, an academic who meets a Yaqui medicine man shaman in the desert, and he feeds him different things like mushrooms and peyote. And I love those books. Before I'd ever done, they were definitely, if you want to talk about gateway drugs, those books are definitely gateway drugs. There we go. Beautiful. Yeah, I think I have still one in my bookcase here. Those were really, really beautiful. And yeah, kind of well, what I think is really relevant maybe to the US and maybe is different in Madrid. And I was just realizing when we were talking. So you were talking about, so the voodoo element, which that is a witchcraft element that's Caribbean, but also in parts of the US, like you say, New Orleans, the southern area. We also have the Native American tradition of, they weren't calling it witchcraft or anything like that, but elements of spiritual practice, accessing realms. And then we have the European witch stuff, which came over and settled in the Appalachian Mountains and everything like that. So the US is kind of this crucible, this cauldron of all of these different traditions. And maybe that's why there's so much interest in it, and it's become into all of our pop culture here. I mean, I guess a lot of different places too. So yeah. Any thoughts on?
There is an yes, we have to be careful because Buddhism is actually a religion, and then the practice of witchcraft, that will be hoodoo,
Okay.
which has some elements that are common,
Okay.
but the same, like for instance, prayer, to pray or to meditate, or to reach a state of trance, that's going to be common in witchcraft and the practice of religion. So there are like lots of things that are close to it, but
Right.
and I make this distinction because this distinction because for many years, in many cultures, voodoo has been like has had this ominous shadow as black magic. Actually, no, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful and in a very complex. And one of the things that made it so complex is that you need a family tradition,
Huh.
and they have to be practitioners for decades. But anyway, so and then you have hoodoo, as you've said. Now hoodoo, it's beautiful because so it's gonna have black practices from Africa, and then Native American, European, everybody's. It's like music. um, Hoodoo could be the equivalent to blues or country, or jazz. So it's beautiful, as you can say, as you have said. The United States is the crucible. It's very interesting, indeed. And like Spain was for a while a crucible, but I think that right now, and for many decades, there's been just one religion, and anything else, and that's actually stopped the tradition of horror writing. Like you are a horror writer in Spain, and it's actually not cool at all. It's beginning to be nice now. We can go without masks, and but I'm not using my real name, for instance.
Hmm.
And we depend on the English markets. I don't think that we can be independent yet as horror writers. We have to depend on, we have to depend on the United States, and yes, we can. It's like we still, in my particular, from my particular point of view, in Spain and in Europe too, we need more time to develop our own horror. Like because for now, even the subjects and everything has been imported from the United States, and it's very funny because it's like I think it will like it's like a story or a movie in which very imaginative and quiet people go to the States because they are not popular in their own towns in Europe. And then they create what, they create the United States. But, like there is still creative people. We can't go to the United States anymore. And we are like trying to wait for the right moment to actually like bloom and develop. But it's actually very difficult if we don't have a market, or if we don't have it's actually very difficult.
So would you say
um
people are just uptight about it?
sorry, can you repeat that again?
Are people in Spain and in those regions you talk about, they're just uptight about the horror thing? Because we tend to think in America of people in Europe as not as uptight as us. That you're more cultured, you more accept like the past elements and also are more willing to move into the future. No?
Oh, not no, 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 not at all. And actually, like in Spain, we are going back, or reaching a dangerous point of going back to the past, and totalitarianism, and one thing, and thought, and intolerance. It's there. So all the whatever we have moved in the past since Franco died, we are going back again. It's just amazing. I mean, I think that it's always been like horror has always been a subculture matter. It's not as prestigious as in the States. Perhaps I'm it's very funny because we can see the horror into different things. But for instance, I don't know, it will be it will be almost impossible in Spain for someone to be a Stephen King, or even we still need to have our Shirley Jackson, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, once we have Shelley, we can have a Stephen King. And Lovecraft. You know what I mean? Like all the horror tradition, all your grandparents and everything. We still need to have them and to develop our own horror.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, not at all, not at all. It's such a pity. We should we should be more open-minded, but I think that it's not. I'm having conversations with peers in Europe, and there are some like in the Scandinavian countries is a bit more like open-minded,
Right.
and there is like a resurgence of the genre in East Europe. But then you have France and Italy. Italy, yeah, there are people who are fighting a lot for that, for expansion of the genre. But anyway, it's difficult here. Very difficult. You're very lucky in the States.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. And yeah, I guess that
Yeah.
gives me a new appreciation for the US. I mean, I wonder if there's some history in Spain, particularly maybe with witchcraft or religion, that just makes it a little more of a sore spot. I mean, in the States, obviously we killed plenty of witches too, but the witch burning was going on for a lot longer in Europe. So maybe obviously there are things other than witches, but witches seem to be pretty central in terms of just history of dark stuff. And let's not dig all that stuff up. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
It's how to say it? Like for instance, books, everything. Like I have to go to English in order to research things that might have happened in Spain, and are to. I mean, there might be a couple of anthropologists, but then it comes a moment in which the horror of witches, of witchcraft, for instance, it stops being anthropology, and it begins to be a reality.
Right.
It's not something that someone researches, but someone that it's not something. Excuse me. It's not something that someone researches, but something that someone practices.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice, not a matter of a study. And that's where, for instance, in Spanish, if I want to find something, I have to go to South American sources, like, for instance, Carlos Castaneda, but there are other people. So, and practice, I'm not talking about just, like a university, academia, PhD, research. No, practice. And
Yeah.
that's where that's when the horror begins, when it's not a matter of study, it's not something that you are reading and it's there. No, actually, suddenly the reality of magic, whatever, if even if it is provoke, if it is hero's journey, if it is an an end, or an initial step, that's absolutely and says, okay, I'm panicking here, but I have to overcome that. And then, so, but is it, I'm fascinated by that, like, moment in which you panic and everything freezes. You don't, your mind doesn't know what's going on. Even, like, it might be yourself, becoming. Actually, like many, when was it? I think that it was a philosopher that said something like, in order to overcome a disease, you have to become it. But I can't remember right now who said that. But it was something like that, and it is related. Now, how do you become your sickness, or or how, because your body is experiencing something very strange. Everything is in chaos. How, you have to suspend self-awareness in order, I don't know, it's actually very difficult. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Yeah, certainly elements of that. And the term panic comes from the great god Pan and the state, not necessarily of terror, like of holy terror that Pan would basically put people into. So I know a little bit about what you're talking about. Yeah, and there's even a band called Cypress Hill, kind of a hip hop band. I believe it was them, or I could be wrong, but a band like them get down with the sickness. So that concept of, yeah, going into it, understanding it, and yeah, so that's really interesting to me and very relevant.
That could, yeah, it could be an initiation, of course. So,
Right. And that's why a
um,
lot of initiation rites of tribal people, for instance, are going out into the forest alone, in something, or a vision quest or something like that, particularly for, more often for young boys, I think, because young girls typically have, menstruation is already kind of the built-in initiation, right? But boys don't have that. So yeah, that's important and also been largely lost. I mean, I come from, culturally at least, a Jewish tradition, so there's the bar mitzvah. It's mostly going through the motions, but at least there's a thing. So yeah, initiation, and the initiation particularly into adulthood, where you're going from that childhood wonder of just, basically, I would say, just only accepting elements of light, and then all of a sudden you accept, oh, there's a shadow here too. You got to be able to handle this stuff.
yeah, it's actually, I was, you've made me thought of, excuse me, made me think of, um, James Fraser again, The Golden Board. There was, when I read it, I I was 20, and I was very shocked by this. There is a tribe in which young girls are actually caged. They can touch the floor, so like they are like in the air in cages of, very basic cages. Everything is polluted around her. They can touch it. But I actually think that what they, like, obviously they are protecting, or what it is protected is their ability to procreate. And because it's a strange, it's a sacred. Many cultures are going to treat that in different ways. But anyway, like most of the time, young girls are not going to, and I think that they will, for that you will have, or the one that I can remember now is Eleusis, the Greek tradition. And then there was an initiation with related to the myth of Persephone.
Right.
She went she was she ate because she ate the seeds of pomegranates. Hades took her.
Right.
So there was a rite about it, and I think that it was mostly women. And well, the mind wonders what could have been. But I think again, like it's almost sure, it's almost certain that the initiation also had some kind of psycho LSD psycho initiation. It would be like a psycho initiation or psycho blending or psycho something that they had to probably drink, eat, or even inhale. So in order to do that, but all the, I can't think of any other tradition that was so open-minded. No, not open-minded. I don't know how to say, with girls or with women. Most of the time, the heavy stuff is going to be endured by men or young men. Mm.
Right. Yeah. Well, that brings us kind of to the topic. Maybe we can just briefly get into it because we kind of already did. So when you think of witch, you usually think of women, right? And at least in most traditions, and certainly the witch burnings, those were, but it's funny, it was mostly women. If you look it up, it was mostly women, but there was actually figures range. I mean, I think I saw like maybe 20% were also men, and also as werewolves. That's a whole other different thing. Like literally killed for being a werewolf. Well, allegedly, I guess. So we typically do in our minds, I think, meld that together, even though, as you say, in certain traditions, well, certainly like most shamans, say in African traditions, are men, mostly. But we think of the witch burning and stuff like that as kind of a misogynistic thing, which to a certain degree it has to be if it's targeting women. And it's sort of like, in my mind, it's an overstating of the feminine shadow, the shadow, masculine, feminine shadow, yin yang, however you want to look at it, and then kind of blowing that up into an insane degree where it's like, look at this maybe particularly odd woman living on the outskirts of town. She's a witch, let's kill her. Or look at these young girls who are, acting like young girls, whatever, and maybe doing something crazy or weird. They're witches. So that is certainly, I think, a misogynistic element. But why do you think so much of at least the current view of witch tends to track over to women? Even, yeah. What do you think about that?
I think that that's a I don't know if I'm going to be unpopular with this opinion, but I think that is a misconception. I actually think that there were witches, male witches. Probably, well, first of all, I think that we have, how to say, like from time to time, all these sort of supernatural, spiritual, manipulative world of sorcery and witchcraft disappears for because there is a war, because sources are lost, because people who actually incarnate and practice it are lost too. And then the terminology changes. But for it, you have shamans, they have been, and healers and medicine men. They are witches.
Right.
They are male, and traditionally, I mean, I think there is a guy here. Timothy R. Landry. I listened to a talk called Voodoo, Secrecy, and the Search for Divine Power. And he differentiates very well the male, which is like young, and young, and the female power, which is Jin, and how he had researched that that powerful difference, because actually it's a powerful difference.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning that it should be differentiated. So I know, obviously, I'm interested in the part in which women have lost and must recover abilities as female, as female witches or female healers, or let's call it female practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that everything is a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, as someone who wants to know the truth, I'm not biased. So I actually think that I'm not biased, and actually I have observed that it is a real truth that male and female power are going to be different. So I hope that more it can be gender fluid. I don't know. That's going to be for researchers now very difficult to know, because I think that many, how to say, it's all about records, and some things are not recorded, or even destroyed on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So the research in the past is going to be difficult, and but like, look at Salem. In Salem, there were male witches, and it was differentiated. Actually, yes, I had this here. Male witches or male sorcerers in Shakespeare. I think actually King Lear is talks about Shakespeare is there are some I've found some researchers who claim that King Lear is actually a treatise on black magic, and it's amazing because it happens between eclipses. So there are going to be like some elements that are like, oh my god, I wonder if someone could make a movie from that point of view, like Macbeth. In Macbeth, it's going to be clearer how Macbeth is manipulated first by the three witches and then by Lady Macbeth. So I think that it is there, the existence of male witches, but we haven't realized them. In your tradition, for instance, I have this beautiful book, Martin Buber. I don't know if, hold
Mm-hmm.
on. Yeah, Martin Buber. So okay, he didn't practice witchcraft at all. It was something different. It was a miracle in his particular case, the Baal Shem Tov. He used to, well, he had a circle of practitioners, and he could do amazing things. He could do wonders. So it depends. As you can see, if there is, that's something that we also have to review. If the end is bad, that's going to be witchcraft. But if the end is good, it's going to be healing, or it's going to be a wonder, or it's going to be a miracle. But how to say it, the rules of the game of magic are the same, whether you have one result or the other. Is actually I believe that the background is similar, and it's much more. I mean, in practices, it's going to be less established, and in religions, it's going to be much more complex.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, well, maybe kind of just to conclude things, this has been really, really fascinating. So one thing I was thinking about that may kind of just come full circle there. So you're talking about voodoo as a religion, and hoodoo is more of the craft, or maybe even the practice. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, but now, so that is different than, say, so European witches, which, and because of Christianity, I mean, they're the bad guys, right? So they are a pact with the devil. Like, that's the whole point. If you're a witch, in a sense, according to Christianity, and most of the lore around that is you've made a pact with the devil, which is definitely different than other views of that. Certainly different than the Native American version. I mean, it is their religion. That religion incorporates, those religions do a better job, Native American stuff and possibly voodoo, of incorporating the light and the shadow, whereas Christianity is just like, nope, there's only light, there's only light. It's very obsessed. And then of course their shadow becomes so much where they're literally killing witches because they're seeing their own shadow everywhere. So that's a very different thing. Like, literally, kissing the ass, like kiss my ass, like came from the initiation of kissing the devil's anus, which is what witches are supposed to do, or you have sex with the devil or whatever the hell they're making up. I'm reading Malleus Maleficarum right now, the whole witch.
Wow.
It's a boring, stupid book, but every now and then there's some really interesting stuff. It's mostly just like, it's the Bible, like, because of the Bible, it's kind of dumb and boring, but it's good to know. But one thing I was thinking about in the US, which again, you're giving me more of appreciation for the US stuff, is, so rock and roll is a US phenomenon. And what rock and roll is a melding of blues. So originally African, then African American, Black blues, and folk music, which came from Europe, and then Appalachian, people and stuff like that. So that combined that. So in the US, our view of witchcraft is probably similarly like influenced by the hoodoo and the European witchcraft. So we have this interesting melding of, whether you think about it or not, US witch stuff, it culturally appropriates everything. And it's, what's really interesting though to me is, so all these different cultures, though, they all have elements of this different witchcraft stuff, which I guess has to mean that it's real, right? It wouldn't originate everywhere if there wasn't something to it, huh?
Absolutely, but it is obviously, I am a firm believer that whatever we do is magic, but it's just the transcendence or the reach, or whatever it reaches, like the more it reaches, the more powerful. Okay, obviously there are going to be rites that are very complicated, yeah, I don't know the names right now. I will have to but A Dark Zone. It's a movie in which there is the calling of an angel. It's this a Solomonic. Oh, I can't remember right now, but so it's going to be there. You can actually see the practice and how far it reaches. It can reach even more, I think. Yes, I think that everything it is, if everything it's magic. The only thing in Christianity and in Europe, um, of there, how to say, it's not allowed to think about certain things. For instance, El Pacto de las 12 Uvas, my novel, it took me 20 years because there are passages in which are like Goya's black paintings, very dark and with the devil, etc. And I had to be brave in my mind to imagine them. So first of you have to imagine them, and then you have to give permission to yourself, and then you go further in the imagining of the things. Okay, and that's, I think that in that particular case, the United States has been favoring imagination, imagining everything, whilst in Spain in particular, and in Europe, generally speaking, it has been, the subconscious has been all the time dominated by Christianity and Christian thought. or either Protestant or whatever. Now, um, something very beautiful about witchcraft, and it's that it's very individual, and that's why, for instance, voodoo and hoodoo are going to have a similar root, but then in each country is going to have differences. And I think that in each practitioner of Santeria and hoodoo, and voodoo is a religion, so I'm not gonna name it more in this particular, um, but they are gonna have very specific and personal touches, like yourself writing horror, for instance. Okay, it will be your horror, and what you are proposing. Hey guys, this is what terrifies me, or I'm going to present to you, or show you, or make you feel horror with my elements, or I'm going to propose you these elements of horror, and that's subjective. Okay, so that's why I think it's subjectivity is very important, and in witchcraft actually is actually very important. I can't believe that, like, um the shamans and practitioners that I respect are the ones that are going to say, okay, these are the basic rules, but it comes a moment in which it's your conversation with the supernatural. It's your conversation. It's nobody else's conversation. So you can copy, but to one point. It's actually very funny because for instance, people go follow Crowley, Aleister Crowley, with Telema and everything, and they go to Boleskine House, and I always think Boleskine House was Crowley's finding. He searched for that house, and it was his. It was his. I just can't believe that everybody's following, like going to Boleskine as if it. Obviously, yes, it has something because it called his attention, but the beautiful thing will be for each follower of Aleister or Crowley is to find their own Boleskine, or to find their own place to perform wherever. So it's again, like going back to what I was saying, the undefending. It's very subjective and individual. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I think that's a great way to end things. Yeah, find your own version of things, find your own version of your fiction, of your lifestyle, of your own ideology. You don't have to go lockstep rigid into what the tradition of others. Learn from the tradition, evolve upon it. Yeah, I love that. So thank you, Rosemary, for coming on. This was a really fascinating discussion. Folks want to find your stuff or get in touch with you possibly, how would they do so?
Oh, I've got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, Rosemary Thorne. And yeah, there is a witch. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful picture of a 17th century painting. So not myself, because for sorcery, actually Carlos Castaneda defends that we have to delete our faces. We have to change. That way we can actually become animals or become whatever. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank
you.
Thank
you, Josh, for thank you for inviting me. That was very beautiful.
Of course.
Thanks for taking a trip with me through Josh's Worst Nightmare, where I, Josh Schlossberg, survey the dark landscape of biological horror fiction presented by Denver Horror Collective. If you don't want to miss any of the great, and sometimes disturbing, weekly episodes I've got planned for you, be sure to subscribe to Josh's Worst Nightmare on a variety of podcast platforms. You can also sign up for Josh's Worst Nightmare e-newsletter at joshsworstnightmare.com, where I share a whole squirming mess of bio-horror, including my infamous haiku horror reviews and my latest dark scribblings. Speaking of which, if you haven't already picked up a copy of my cosmic biological folk horror novella, Maline, from D&T Publishing, you can find a copy of the paperback, hardcover, or ebook at Amazon, Godless.com, or Josh'sWorstNightmare.com. Yours darkly, Josh Schlossberg.